The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Matthew. Jesus said to the chief priests and the elders of the people, "What is your opinion? A man had 2 sons. He came to the first and said, 'Son, go out and work in the vineyard today.' He said in reply, 'I will not,' but afterwards changed his mind and went. The man came to the other son and gave the same order. He said in reply, 'Yes, sir,' but did not go. Which of the 2 did his father's will?" They answered, "The first." Jesus said to them, "Amen, amen, I say to you, tax collectors and prostitutes are entering the kingdom of God before you. When John came to you in the way of righteousness, you did not believe him, but tax collectors and prostitutes did. Yet even when you saw that, you did not later change your minds and believe him." The Gospel of the Lord. So as you've noticed, the Knights of the Holy Temple are back and serving strong at Mass. I'm really happy they are. This morning, some of you may have noticed the devil was trying to get us down here before Mass today. There were a bunch of firefighters here at the church. The fire alarm went off, but fortunately enough for us, the devil was a little bit early, and so went off before Mass. We don't need to worry about it anymore, so we can have as much incense as we'd like. Yeah, right? It's great. I love incense. I love things that are Catholic, okay? And incense is one of those things. And there's a couple of reasons why the Knights of the Holy Temple, I want them to be serving more regularly, even every Sunday here at our church. First of all, because I myself was a Knight of the Holy Temple in high school, and I can think of nothing that helped me more to grow in my faith and to help me grow in virtue than the brotherhood I experienced as a Knight of the Holy Temple. It was also hugely influential in helping me discern my vocation, what God was calling me to do in life. As I think all of us recognize, our young people face many challenges that many older folks here in this parish were not exactly subject to. It's very difficult to be a young person and to be a devout Catholic, and we need to form any ways of support we can to help our young people in that regard. So Knights of the Holy Temple is something we do for our young men. It's also significant that we use incense every time we have Mass. When we talk about the liturgy is the source and summit of our faith as Catholics, as the Church teaches. And it's important that we do it up, right? The Church, there's this old phrase, lex orandi, lex credendi. Lex orandi, lex credendi. Some of you might know what that means from your catechism class days. What it means is that how we worship teaches us what we actually believe. How we worship teaches us how we believe. Now, there are many Catholics in our church today that even though the Eucharist is the source and summit of everything we do, there are a majority of Catholics who don't believe in the Eucharist or don't understand what the Eucharist is. And I would suggest that one of the causes for that is how we worship. Sometimes Catholics have this idea that coming to Mass is just like going to any other church, and in fact, in those other churches, the homilies tend to be a lot better. And so why bother coming to Mass? Right? There's this idea out there. And so I want every person who comes to Mass here at this parish to recognize there is something different, and that at every single Mass, we will be incensing the Lord of the universe, bringing attention to what is taking place at the altar. Statistics say that close to 70% of Catholics don't believe or don't understand the Eucharist. And I don't want that to be the case here at our parish. One of the ways we're going to go about that is by incensing the Eucharist as often as we can at Mass. Some of you might have some allergies to incense, and I understand, every time we do incense, I have to take some extra allergy medicine in the morning. I get it. But sometimes it's good for us to be a little bit uncomfortable. As a priest, I have to wear a lot of different layers of clothing, and oftentimes I get pretty sweaty at Mass. And there was a priest in seminary who told me, he said, it's good to sweat when you come to church. Sometimes it's not good how comfortable we can feel at Mass. And so if you have some slight allergies to incense, this is a great time to offer that up. Maybe take a little bit more medicine before you come to Mass, or if you need to, you can always sit in the back or sit over here in the overflow section, whatever you need to do. But from now on, I want us to be using incense most, if not every Sunday. Okay, so that's just a little public service announcement about the Knights of the Holy Temple up here with me. Now for the homily. Second homily, you might say. Back in the 70s, there was a terrible murderer who was on a campaign here in our country, and I'm sure many of you have heard of him. His name was Ted Bundy. All right, Ted Bundy. How many of you remember Ted Bundy? All right, now how many of you under the age of 25, how many of you remember Ted Bundy or have heard of him? All right, some of you. Okay, so yeah. I wasn't alive when Ted Bundy was around, and neither were many of them, but still some people know about Ted Bundy. Ted Bundy was a very dark and evil story that plagued our country over the course of about a decade in the 1970s. He's famously known for terrible atrocities he committed against various women and murdering them and violating them. A lot of us remember that story, but not all of us know how the story ended. Did you know that his last victim actually survived the attack? It was an attempted victim, and she survived. It was a night in 1978. Ted Bundy broke into a sorority house in Florida, and he broke in and he murdered 2 young girls living in that sorority. And he went to a third room seeking his final victim. And when he went into the room, he opened the door, and the girl was lying asleep in bed. And for some reason, he left without pursuing the murder. Shortly thereafter, he was arrested. 10 years later, as he was on death row, something else happened. He asked to speak to a Catholic priest just before his death in 1989. And he spoke to the priest. And it just so happened that this priest had actually been in that same town the night of that attempted murder 10 years earlier. And that priest had gone in and spoken to the young girl who was asleep in bed. When the police came, of course, she was in a terrified state. And she said that she wouldn't speak to anyone until she could speak to a Catholic priest. And so the priest came. And he asked her about what happened. And she said she had been lying asleep in bed, and she saw the door swing open with a man holding a large knife. And all of a sudden, he dropped the knife and fled. And the priest asked her about it. She said that when she went to college, she had made a promise to her mother that every single night before going to bed, she would pray the Rosary. And that night, she had been praying the Rosary, and like many of us who pray the Rosary before going to bed, she fell asleep. But the Rosary remained in her hand. And she told him this. Now, this priest, 10 years later, was the same priest who went and visited Ted Bundy on death row. And Ted Bundy, even though he wasn't a Christian or a Catholic, clearly, he asked him, he said, I don't understand what happened that night. I had every intention of murdering that girl. But when I opened the door, I was repelled by some invisible force, and the knife was flung out of my hand, and I was forced to flee, not able to finish what I had started. He said, explain to me what happened. And the priest said, well, it just so happens I'm the same priest who went and spoke to that young girl the night of the murder, and she had a weapon in her hand, the Rosary. And it was from the power of the Blessed Virgin Mary that you were expelled from that room. Amazing story, right? Amazing story, the power of the Rosary. There are many other miracles the Rosary has performed in recent years. A lot of you recall World War II. Maybe some of you were alive in World War II, I don't know. Another trivia question for our young people. If you're under the age of 25, raise your hand if you know who the president was at the end of World War II. Tommy? Was it Harry Truman? Is that what you were saying? It was Harry Truman. It wasn't Franklin Roosevelt. So Harry Truman was the president at the end of World War II, and he decided to drop the atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki in Japan. And hundreds of thousands of people died from the atomic bomb blasts. But it just so happens that there was a community in Hiroshima and also in Nagasaki that existed and survived completely unharmed by the blasts of the atomic bomb. There was a Franciscan monastery in Hiroshima and also in Nagasaki. They prayed the Rosary every day. And even though the one in Hiroshima was literally just blocks from where the bomb landed, none of the monks were harmed. None of them even experienced radiation damage or a loss of hearing. And each of them attributed it to the miraculous power of the Rosary, which they prayed every day in communion together. The Rosary is a powerful tool that can be used to protect us against various dangers. The Rosary is also a powerful tool in bringing about conversions. Oftentimes, when missionaries would travel the world in the early modern ages, when they would come to Latin America and Central America, they didn't have space to bring Bibles or to bring theological books. Instead, they brought with them the Rosary, which they considered a summary of the New Testament on a set of beads. And they taught people to pray the Rosary, and it was very successful in bringing about conversions. I wonder if anybody knows the story about where the Rosary comes from. There's a famous saint who received the Rosary. His name was St. Dominic. We're getting all sorts of trivia in here today. St. Dominic lived in the early 1200s, and there was a very terrible heresy going around in those days. It was called the Albigensian Heresy. Now, sometimes today we think of heresies and we think, those are just meaningless academic disputes. Not so. If there was a rapid communist revolution in our country, you would probably be nervous about that. Or if there was a revolution centered around Nazi ideology, you'd probably be concerned about that. Same way, in a Christendom culture, heresies caused a lot of divisions and oftentimes violence in society. So they were a big threat. St. Dominic made it his mission to eradicate the Albigensian heresy with the power of his preaching. And he was a great preacher. Very intelligent, very good preacher. And he started preaching for 3 years and achieved very little success. And so he took a time of retreat, 3 days and 3 nights, and he fasted. And he went off by himself and made this retreat. And at the end of those 3 days and 3 nights, he received a vision from the Blessed Virgin Mary. And the Blessed Virgin Mary, she handed him a rosary. At that time, it was called the Psalter. And she said, "Preach my Psalter." And St. Dominic began to do that. He began to preach the rosary and hand out rosaries and pray rosaries whenever he would preach, and achieved amazing results. I imagine nobody here has ever met an Albigensian heretic. It's because they were eradicated. St. Dominic was victorious, achieved great success through the power of the rosary. Friends, the rosary has so much power. Power to protect us, and power to change hearts and bring about conversions. Because Mary has tremendous power. And she has specifically given us the rosary to bring about great conversions and to protect us. This upcoming month of October, the church has given us as the month of the rosary. The church encourages us to increase our devotion to praying the rosary. And I would like all of us to do that. October is the month of the rosary because of a famous military battle, October 7th, 1571. For many years in the Middle Ages, Christianity in Europe was constantly on the verge of being taken over by the Muslim threat of armies. Islam was the dominant world force in the world up until the 1600s. In one of the most dire times, Battle of Lepanto, 1571, October 7th. And the Christians were outnumbered. And they were full of soldiers who weren't really soldiers. Many of them were old men who had just worked on farms or in factories. Not factories, but various other jobs. None of them were soldiers. And the Pope asked the entire world to pray for those men in battle. And even though they were greatly outnumbered and greatly outskilled, they won the victory. And they won the victory with great success. And the Pope attributed the salvation of Christianity to all those people who had prayed the rosary. So we recall that every year, the month of October. I would like all of us to commit in this month of October to praying the Rosary, preferably praying the Rosary every day. I myself, every morning I wake up, I come over to the church, I pray for an hour, and then I pray the Rosary every day. I've made that commitment. Now you might be saying, well, but what if I don't know how to pray the Rosary? Well, fortunately, there's plenty of things on the internet that you can look at and download. There's even Rosary applications that can teach you how to pray the Rosary. Or you can ask some of our church experts on the Rosary. What if you're one of those people who says, well, I don't like praying the Rosary because it's too repetitive? I too thought that for a long time. But let me ask you this. You wives, do you ever tire of your husbands telling you that they love you? You parents, do you ever get tired of your children saying, I love you? That's exactly what the Rosary is. It's our way of telling Jesus and Mary over and over again how much we love them. Praying the Rosary out of love. Some people might think, well, the Rosary is outdated, or maybe it's just for real churchy folks. I remember when I was a kid, the only times I would pray the Rosary was when I was at my grandmother's house, and it was like I was forced to do it, right? I didn't get a whole lot out of it. Or maybe you're one of those people who just simply doesn't see the need for the Rosary. I want to say something specifically to the men here in the church today about the Rosary, because I imagine if this church is like any other church, if we took a survey of how many people pray the Rosary, I guarantee you there would be much more women than men who pray the Rosary. And so I want to speak to all the men in the church today specifically. The Rosary in particular, it's great for all Catholics, all people to pray. But in a particular way, the Rosary was given to men. It was given to St. Dominic, and so many of the other champions of the Rosary in church history have been men. It's a great tool for men. It's like a spiritual sword. That's one of the reasons why oftentimes monks and priests, they'll actually wear rosaries on their belt, because that's where knights used to hold their swords. Right? The Rosary is like a spiritual sword. It's also important for us, for men, because it teaches us how to be better men. If you want to learn how to love your wife more purely, with greater devotion, what better way than by praying the Rosary and learning from Mary, who taught her husband to be the most chaste spouse? If you want to teach your sons how to respect women, teach them to pray the Rosary. Reflect on the beauty of Mary. If you want your daughters to know their dignity as daughters of God, teach them to pray the Rosary, reflecting on the beauty of Mary and the beauty that they're called to. The Rosary is such an important tool, especially for us as men, to teach us to be more godly, more virtuous, more faithful. What if you don't have time to pray the Rosary? Make time. Like I said, I get up earlier every day so that I have time to pray the Rosary. It takes 15 minutes. Or maybe take advantage of times you already have. Think about how much time you spend doing laundry or doing dishes. Why not pray the Rosary while you do those things? Maybe before a meal, instead of saying the traditional Catholic meal prayer, maybe pray a decade of the Rosary. Pray it on your way to work. Maybe while you're at work or while you're in between classes. Pray one decade. And pray one decade at various times throughout the day, getting the Rosary in. Friends, last week we talked about tithing. So often in church we talk about spiritual tithe, or we talk about financial tithes, and I think it's important for us to think about our spiritual tithing. All of us should be praying for our parish on a daily basis. And what better way to do that than the Rosary? My few weeks here at this parish, many people have been able to share with me their experience of Crawfordsville and the parish, and oftentimes people will tell me, well, there was a time when our church was much bigger and much more active. Or some people will say, well, I really like how these other churches do things. I have to be honest, here in my time at St. Bernard's, I feel like we're in the driver's seat. We have a lot of influential people in this community. We have the food pantry in our community. We have a booming Hispanic population in our community. We have a great ministry to Wabash College. We have so many faithful Catholics, and above all, we have our beautiful Catholic faith. I think there's no reason why our church should not be filled to the brim every Sunday. I see no reason why there shouldn't be people constantly coming to us, asking to join RCIA, wanting to become Catholic. We have so many things going for our parish. And I think we can get there. And I think it should start with all of us committing to pray the Rosary. Pray the Rosary every day. Pray for our parish, for our city of Crawfordsville, our friends and family, all those Catholics we know that have left this parish or left the faith. I want to ask all of us during the month of the Rosary to pray the Rosary with fidelity and vigor.